I had just taken the first sip of my coffee when I saw a woman in high heels and a clipboard marching toward my front gate, followed by a group of lawn chair carrying neighbors like some kind of cultish hoe parade. She stopped at my gate, pointed like a general leading a siege, and said, "We'll be needing your key by Monday." We voted. It's official. I nearly choked on my coffee because what she didn't know was this wasn't just a gate. It was the front line of her legal disaster. It had started off as a quiet Saturday morning. Birds were chirping, the lake shimmered beyond my trees, and for once no leaf blowers were disturbing the peace. My house sat on several acres of inherited land, far enough from the chaos of suburbia, but just close enough that the local hoe had started to get ideas. The lake behind my property was the crown jewel of the region, spring-fit, pristine, and accessible only through a few legacy properties like mine. The whole neighborhood had been built years after my family acquired the land, and their lots were fenced away from the lake by both law and legacy. They could see it but not reach it, and that had driven some of them into full-on obsession. I had always kept things neighborly. I waved, I helped tow a stuck car once, I even donated a generator during a winter outage. But everything changed when Karen became the new hoe president. She strutted into the role like she had been elected mayor of a small nation. Rules multiplied overnight: grass height, curtain colors, even trash can alignment. But it wasn't until she showed up that morning with her posse and clipboard that I realized just how delusional her power trip had become. "Excuse me," she said loudly, tapping her pen against my gate like she was ringing a bell. "We've had a vote. The community agrees your gate is the most logical access point to the lake. You'll need to provide a key for hoe-approved access before Monday." I blinked. "You mean you want me to hand over the key to my private gate?" "Yes, it's in everyone's best interest. The current path is too long and your driveway is faster. It's a matter of community efficiency." I sipped my coffee again, slower this time, trying to buy myself a moment so I didn't laugh in her face. Behind her, one of the whole minions was literally setting up a folding chair on my property line. Another one had brought a picnic basket. They were acting like they had already claimed it. "Karen, I'm not part of the whole," I said slowly. "This land is mine. It's not governed by your bylaws. My gate stays locked." Karen didn't flinch. "Well, proximity implies cooperation, and the lake is technically community adjacent." I stared at her. That sentence didn't make legal sense. "We already voted. If you don't comply, we'll have to report you for obstruction." That made me chuckle. "To whom?" "The whole police." She stiffened, her eyes narrowing. "You'll regret this decision. Don't say I didn't give you a chance." She turned and walked away like a queen dismissing a peasant. The others followed, but not before one of them dropped a printed flyer in my mailbox. It read, "New Lake Access Route. Gate Key Pickup Monday at noon." That night my motion sensors went off. Someone had walked along the property fence, possibly trying to find another way in. I reviewed the footage and spotted two silhouettes in yoga pants with flashlights, clearly trying not to be seen. That's when I knew this wasn't over. The next morning I installed new high-definition cameras, upgraded the locks, and contacted my cousin Mike. He's a sheriff's deputy who knows the legal boundaries of this area better than anyone. I explained the situation, showed him the flyer, and he let out a low whistle. "They seriously think a vote lets them seize your land," he said. "These whole folks have watched too many courtroom dramas." The next few days were oddly quiet. Karen and her crew were nowhere to be seen. But then on Friday, I returned from town to find a laminated sign zip-tied to my gate. "Access mandatory. Provide gate key or face community sanctions." I couldn't stop laughing. Community sanctions? What were they going to do? Ban me from block parties? That weekend I laid out a full report with GPS maps, deed scans, land surveys, and whole boundary documents. I attached it all in an email to my lawyer and copied Mike. I wasn't just going to defend my land. I was going to bury them in their own stupidity. But Monday came, and sure enough, a car caravan showed up. Karen stepped out in heels again, as if the dirt path leading to my gate was some suburban runway. Behind her, a locksmith and 3 board members unfolded chairs, and waited like they were about to conduct an official ceremony. I stood at the top of the driveway with a GoPro mounted on a tripod and my coffee in hand. "You're trespassing," I said plainly. "You've been warned." Karen smiled. "You're being difficult. I'll be submitting a formal complaint with our legal committee, the one with zero jurisdiction over me." She didn't answer. Instead, she motioned to the locksmith. The man walked forward, tools in hand, as if this was just another day at the office. But just before his hand reached the lock, 2 squad cars rolled up from the county road. Behind them, Mike stepped out of one. Karen's smug expression faded. Mike walked straight to the locksmith. "Sir, you're about to commit trespassing and attempted destruction of private property. You're going to want to step away." The locksmith, suddenly pale, dropped his tools and backed off like he'd touched a live wire. Karen stepped in. "He's working under HOA authority." Mike raised an eyebrow. "The HOA doesn't have authority here. This is private land. Not only are you trespassing, but you've now tried to enforce false legal action on someone outside your jurisdiction." Karen went red. "We had a vote." "And the courts are going to love hearing about that," Mike said calmly, reaching for his citation pad. As citations were issued and HOA board members panicked in every direction, I looked back at my gate, my peaceful, simple gate that had somehow become the center of a suburban power war. I took another sip of my coffee, watching as Karen yelled into her phone. The locksmith sped off, and Mike wrote down license plate numbers. This wasn't just about a gate anymore. This was going to be fun. The week after the gate showdown was strangely quiet, which in Karen's case was more terrifying than her yelling. It wasn't like her to back down after being embarrassed in public, especially not with 2 squad cars parked behind her while she was being cited for trespassing. I knew better than to think it was over. Karen didn't retreat. She regrouped. So I started preparing. I made copies of all the security footage, backed it up to a cloud server, handed one version to my lawyer and another to my cousin Mike. Meanwhile, I focused on my own life and tried not to obsess, but I kept getting little signs that the whole machine was gearing up for a bigger move. The first hint came in the form of a flyer that somehow ended up taped to the local post office bulletin board. It read, "Community Lake Access Initiative. Phase 2 begins." At the bottom, there was a rough sketch of the lake with a dotted red line running straight through my driveway. They even labeled it Future Access Route, pending. No names, no official letterhead, just the vague smell of Karen all over it. I stood there reading the poorly formatted sheet and chuckled. Pending what? Divine intervention. I decided not to react immediately. I wanted to see what they'd do next. 2 days later, I got my answer. My neighbor Tom, a retired guy with a habit of oversharing and an endless supply of neighborhood gossip, stopped by while walking his dog. He leaned on my fence like he owned the place and whispered, "You know Karen's holding a special HOA vote tomorrow, right? Something about getting legal right of way through your gate." I raised an eyebrow. "She can't vote her way through my deed." "She says the community's been using the lake unofficially for years," Tom said. "Claims it's implied access." "That's a fantasy." "She also said you're being selfish. Called you a gatekeeping hillbilly." I burst out laughing. I am flattered, honestly. But now it was serious. I couldn't just laugh it off anymore. Karen was trying to manufacture a narrative, something that would let her twist public opinion, blur legal lines, and act like she was the victim of my property boundaries. It was petty and delusional, but if left unchecked, that kind of thing had a way of snowballing. I drove to the county records office the next morning. The clerk there, Diana, was an old friend from high school. I explained the situation, showed her the flyer, and asked if the HOA had submitted anything official. She searched their system, and sure enough, Karen had filed a public notice claiming the HOA would be investigating historical use of the access route adjacent to Lakeview Drive. That was my road. She was laying the foundation for some kind of legal action, or at least pretending to. Diana sighed. This woman's going to start a war. She already did. I'm just making sure I have the right ammo. Diana printed out the official records, complete with dates, surveyor stamps, and the original zoning map from 30 years ago. It showed in crystal clear ink that my land was never under HOA control. I had also installed that gravel path to the lake at my own expense, years before the HOA was even formed. The path existed entirely on my land and terminated at a fence that marked the beginning of HOA territory. Karen was trying to erase history with flyers and finger pointing. I took everything home, scanned it, and compiled a folder labeled HOA Delusion Files. It felt good to be prepared, but part of me still didn't trust that Karen would go the legal route. She was too impatient for that. She was the type to take shortcuts, literally and figuratively. That suspicion was confirmed when I received a call from someone I didn't expect. Brian, the HOA treasurer. I barely knew him, but he sounded uneasy, said he wanted to talk in person, and asked to meet at the gas station just outside the neighborhood. When we met, he looked over his shoulder like he was in a spy movie. "She's going too far," he said without greeting. "Karen's trying to get us to approve hiring a contractor to relocate your gate." "Relocate," I repeated. "That's her new word for trespassing. She says it'll be temporary, that we can just move the gate a few yards to open the path and then deal with legalities later." I stared at him. That's not how property works. That's how breaking and entering works. She's also pressuring the board to dip into HOA funds to hire a private surveyor. She says if she can prove community use, she can file for an easement. I leaned back against my truck, already formulating the next part of my plan. "Tell her I said good luck, and tell her to bring bail money." Brian looked exhausted. "I just wanted you to know, if she keeps this up, someone's going to end up in real trouble." I thanked him and went home with a new sense of urgency. If Karen was planning to physically tamper with my property again, I needed to be one step ahead. That evening I called Mike and explained everything. He agreed it was escalating fast and said he'd notify the county sheriff about a potential repeat incident. We both knew Karen wouldn't be able to resist making a move, especially if she thought I was out of town. So I decided to bait her. I posted on the neighborhood forum that I was heading up north for the weekend, pretending I had a cabin trip planned. I even let a few neighbors accidentally overhear me talking about it at the local diner. Then I set everything up. I installed a motion detector in the gravel at the base of the gate and connected it to my phone. I put up fake warning signs like surveillance zone, live monitoring, and made them look official. I mounted a new trail cam across from the entrance, disguised as a bird feeder. And finally, I left my truck in the garage and parked my spare car on the far side of the property to make it look like I'd left. On Friday evening, right after dark, the sensor pinged. I watched on my phone as 3 people crept toward the gate with flashlights. One of them had a toolbox, another was unrolling what looked like cable wire. I recognized the red blazer immediately, Karen. She really couldn't help herself. I didn't call Mike yet. I wanted her caught in the act. I waited until the camera caught the exact moment her little group started to pry open the bottom hinge of the gate. Then I pressed the emergency alert on the app, which sent a ping to Mike and activated the second camera hidden in the tree. Within 15 minutes, headlights lit up the woods like a crime scene in a detective show. Karen froze, deer in headlights style, as uniformed deputies emerged from behind trees like ghosts. One officer pulled out a flashlight and scanned her face. "Step away from the gate." She stammered, "This is a community emergency access improvement." "You're on private property." "You don't understand. We need lake access." "You're holding bolt cutters. You're not asking for access, you're breaking in." I watched it all from my living room, sipping a cold drink, the footage crystal clear. She was arrested right then and there, in front of her HOA entourage, and this time I had it all documented in high definition. It was no longer a game of flyers and threats. It was real now, and Karen had just opened the gate to her own downfall. Karen's arrest spread through the neighborhood like wildfire, but not in the way she probably imagined. By the time the sun rose the next morning, her face had already made it to 3 local Facebook groups, 2 memes, and a neighborhood group chat that included a gif of her holding bolt cutters under the caption, "Karen tries die breaking and entering." Even Tom, who couldn't use a phone without accidentally turning on the flashlight, managed to find the video and play it loudly while walking his dog. I could hear him chuckling as he passed my fence. The whole board had gone silent. No official statement, no defense, not even a bad per attempt, just silence. I half expected Karen to disappear for a while, maybe hole up in her house, lick her wounds, and come up with a new ridiculous plan. But no, this was Karen. She didn't retreat, she doubled down. And this time she did it with paperwork. That Monday, I received a certified letter. It was thick, overly stapled, and smelled like perfume in desperation. Inside was a formal HOA complaint addressed to me, signed by Karen and 2 board members, alleging community obstruction, emotional distress, and interference with communal goals. It claimed my refusal to grant access to the lake had caused massive psychological strain on neighborhood morale and diminished collective recreation. I almost fell out of my chair laughing. Collective recreation. What was I blocking? An Olympic training session? The letter went on to demand an emergency mediation hearing with the HOA, suggesting that a third-party arbitrator step in to evaluate the situation. I didn't even bother calling my lawyer. I just handed the envelope to Mike, who dropped by with fresh updates from the sheriff's office. When he read the letter, he shook his head and muttered, "She really thinks she's the mayor of your property, doesn't she?" But the real fireworks were just beginning. That evening, I received an anonymous tip in the form of an email. The sender used a fake name, but the content was gold. It contained audio recordings of the last whole board meeting. I knew it was real the moment I heard Karen's voice saying, "If we can just get 5 members to claim they've always used the lake trail, we can make it look like historic community use." Another voice, possibly the treasurer, nervously replied, "Isn't that like falsifying a record?" Karen's answer was chillingly confident, "Only if we get caught." She had shifted tactics from public pressure to legal manipulation. She wanted to build a fake narrative, make it look like the entire neighborhood had been using the path through my land for years, and then file a claim for prescriptive easement. But that strategy takes time, proof, and a whole lot of lying. And that was her weak spot. She underestimated just how careful I had been. My cameras, my files, my logs of every time someone trespassed. All of it had built a perfect legal wall around my gate. She was trying to fake a history I had fully documented from day one. The next morning I met with my lawyer, printed copies of the audio files, and prepped a counter motion to shut down any whole arbitration attempts before they started. By the time I left his office, I felt more confident than ever. Karen was getting sloppy, and I was about to make her trip over her own arrogance. That weekend, I hosted a barbecue, not just for fun, but to let the neighborhood know I wasn't hiding or intimidated. I invited Tom, Diana from the records office, even Brian the treasurer, who showed up looking like he hadn't slept in days. He pulled me aside after the burgers were done and quietly said, "She's losing the board. Half of them are scared. She spent whole funds without permission, paid the locksmith, printed flyers, even ran a Facebook ad about the new lake trail." I narrowed my eyes. Did she really spend whole money for an ad? She charged it to the association card, said it was part of her presidential duties. That was it. She wasn't just annoying now. She was breaking her own organization's rules, maybe even committing fraud. The next week, I sent a formal letter to every whole board member outlining Karen's unauthorized spending, the illegal entry attempt, and the fabricated history of lake access. I attached the audio recordings and a copy of the official deed with property maps. I also called the county district attorney, just to make sure nobody ignored it. Within 48 hours, I received a reply from one of the newer board members, a guy named Martin who'd only joined a few months ago. He apologized and said they were calling an emergency session to review Karen's conduct. Now here's where it all took a turn none of them expected. Karen, still unaware the board was turning on her, filed an official complaint with the county about restricted community access to a natural water resource. She tried to argue that since the lake touched whole land at one small curve, the entire body of water should be shared, and by refusing access through my gate, I was obstructing a public good. But she didn't know that the lake was co-owned through a private trust between 5 properties, mine included, and that the trust had explicit rules about access, one of which barred any HOA or subdivision from claiming rights without consent from all members. Diana, who had access to those trust documents, confirmed that Karen's complaint had no legal ground. And worse for her, it triggered an alert with the trust board, who now opened an inquiry into how HOA members were even being told they could access the lake. The next HOA board meeting was closed to the public, but I didn't need to be there. Brian called me afterward, still breathless. It was a massacre, he said. She screamed, cried, threatened to sue all of us, but we voted, Karen's out. She had been stripped of her role as HOA president, her access to funds revoked, and her actions formally denounced in an official community statement. The new president, a mild older woman named Janet, personally came to my property with a letter of apology and promised to reimburse me for the damaged gate and any future legal fees caused by Karen's mess. I thanked her, shook her hand, and asked her one thing: no more votes about my land, right? Janet smiled. Absolutely not. Your gate is your gate. As Karen's house sat untouched for days, her once perfect lawn growing wild and her porch light blinking like a forgotten signal, I walked past it one evening on my way back from the lake. Taped to her mailbox was a flyer from a local real estate agent. Below it, someone had scribbled in Sharpie, "Shortcut denied." It was petty, it was perfect, and it wasn't even my doing. Karen might have lost her hoe crown, but she didn't lose her delusion. That was clear the moment she filed a lawsuit against me claiming emotional trauma, loss of community prestige, and reputational damage caused by my refusal to give her a gate key. It came in a manila envelope left on my porch like a cursed gift. Inside were pages of legal nonsense, including a handwritten list of damages. My favorite line was plaintiff can no longer walk dog past defendant's gate without suffering emotional anguish triggered by gravel crunching underfoot. I read it twice and then laughed so hard I had to sit down. My lawyer, James, wasn't as amused. He called it a nuisance suit designed to scare you into settling. Karen wanted me to give her access out of exhaustion, not legal victory. But what she didn't know, what none of them seemed to learn, was that I didn't get tired. I got organized. James prepared a countersuit for harassment, trespassing, property damage, and the attempted illegal modification of my gate. The best part, we were including security footage, whole financial records from Brian, the HOA's own condemnation of Karen's actions, and a sworn affidavit from the Lake Trust confirming she had no rights to the water or land surrounding it. It was like bringing a bazooka to a water balloon fight. Court day arrived with Karen wearing a bright white suit, looking like she was auditioning for a daytime talk show instead of facing a judge. She gave the cameras a dramatic wave when she stepped out of her car. Yes, she brought cameras. Her niece apparently ran a TikTok channel called HOA Justice Queen, and they were filming everything. I sat quietly at our table while James laid out documents like weapons. Across from us, Karen sat with a lawyer who looked like he had regretted his life choices the second she opened her mouth. The judge, a stern woman with the expression of someone who didn't tolerate foolishness, began reading the case summary. When she got to the line about denied gate access for recreational unity, she stopped, looked over her glasses, and said, "This is about a locked gate on private land." Karen stood up like she was accepting an award. "Your Honor, this is about more than a gate. This is about the soul of a neighborhood, about fairness, about not letting selfish landowners." The judge held up her hand. "Sit down." Karen deflated slightly but obeyed. James stood and handed the judge our folder. Inside were photos of the gate, the damaged hinges, the flyers, the board's vote to remove her, the audio recordings of her coaching board members to lie, and the deed that clearly showed the land had never been part of the HOA. He also included the financial report from Brian that showed she used HOA money for locksmith ads and printed propaganda. The judge took her time. She flipped through everything slowly, carefully, nodding at some pages, raising her eyebrows at others. After 20 minutes of complete silence, she looked up. "Miss Karen, your complaint references a communal right to access land and a body of water not legally accessible to your subdivision. You cite emotional distress caused by being denied entry to property you have no ownership over. Correct? Yes, Your Honor, Karen said confidently, because he is denying us nature. The judge nodded. And yet you entered his property illegally, attempted to cut a lock off his gate, directed HOA funds to that effort, and even attempted to manufacture false history to support your claim. Karen's mouth opened, but her lawyer quickly stood up and said, Your Honor, if I may. No, the judge interrupted, you may not. I've seen enough. What followed was a verbal takedown so clean and so vicious it could have aired as a courtroom drama finale. The judge cited municipal code, land ownership laws, and trust regulations. She ruled Karen's lawsuit not only baseless but reckless and dismissed it with prejudice. Then she turned to our side of the aisle and issued a ruling in our favor. Karen was ordered to pay damages for the broken gate, court costs, and legal fees. But the final blow came when the judge mentioned the potential for criminal charges tied to misuse of HOA funds and fraudulent statements made during her attempts to claim access. Those would be reviewed by the county. Karen didn't cry. She didn't yell. She just stared forward like her soul had been evicted. Her niece lowered the phone camera slowly, finally realizing this wasn't going to be content gold after all. The courtroom emptied out slowly, murmurs and whispers trailing behind me as I walked out. I didn't say a word to Karen. I didn't need to. The law had done the talking. By the time I got home, the neighborhood had already heard. Someone had posted a screenshot of the court ruling on the local group chat with the caption, Karen's Key to Nowhere. That night I hosted a small celebration, just burgers, music, and a few lawn chairs by the lake. Tom brought a case of soda. Brian showed up with his dog and a bottle of wine. Even Janet from the HOA came by with a card that said, Thank you for locking the right gate. What no one saw coming was the last twist. A week after the court ruling, I got an email from a real estate developer. They were interested in buying a section of my land, the same section near the gate. Apparently, the HOA's past drama had brought attention to the area, and now a group wanted to build a tiny dock and offer lakefront access packages for upscale renters. I laughed, deleted the email, and then printed it out just so I could light it on fire in my grill. I wasn't selling anything, not the land, not the lake, and definitely not the gate. A few days later, Karen's house went on the market. Word was she was leaving town. No goodbye, no party, not even a last stand. Just a for sale sign and a listing that awkwardly left out the words HOA President from her neighborhood involvement. As I passed by on a walk, I noticed someone had once again scribbled on her real estate sign. This time it said, Scenic views, no shortcuts. She was gone by the end of the month. I watched the moving truck from my back porch, the lake calm behind me, the gate still locked. And for the first time in months, I didn't check my security cams. I didn't need to. Peace had finally returned, not because I gave in, but because I didn't. After Karen vanished from the neighborhood, the quiet felt unreal. It wasn't the usual silence of a peaceful street or a calm evening. It was the silence of something that had been suffocating the community finally disappearing. There were no more angry flyers stuffed into mailboxes, no sudden demands for lawn standardization, and no one attempting to justify criminal behavior in the name of community convenience. It was just life again, real life. I was finally able to enjoy my morning coffee on the porch without wondering if someone was going to try and install a bench on my property or repaint my gate because it clashed with seasonal colors. But just as I thought the dust had settled, something new stirred, something even stranger. It started with a knock on my door at 10:00 a.m. on a Tuesday. A man in a pressed suit stood there with a leather folder tucked under his arm and a smile that was so polished it felt artificial. He introduced himself as William, a representative from Lakeside Ventures Loc. He said his company had recently acquired property near the far end of the HOA development and had an exciting proposal for me. I didn't invite him in. We stood on the porch as he explained, in the kind of voice used by game show hosts and timeshare peddlers, that his firm was interested in partnering to offer curated lake experiences to high-end vacationers. Then he paused, opened the folder, and slid a piece of paper toward me, a lease agreement. It offered monthly payments in exchange for shared access through my gate and driveway. He used the word minimal disturbance, like it was a selling point, and assured me that their clients would be discreet, respectful, and hand-selected. I looked at him for a long moment, then asked, "Did Karen send you?" He laughed a little too loud and said he'd never heard of her, but the way he shifted told me he knew exactly who she was. When I declined politely but firmly, his salesman mask slit for a second. He tried to guilt me, said the community would benefit, that it would bring property value up, and that resistance like mine often led to legal misunderstandings. That was the wrong move. I leaned in, met his eyes, and said in a low voice, "You want to try and find out how deep those misunderstandings can go. Go ahead. I've got court records, sheriff's reports, and a legal trail 10 miles long that says I'm very comfortable with lawsuits." He left without another word, but 2 days later, I received a strange envelope in my mailbox. No stamp, no return address. Inside was a glossy brochure, mock-ups of cabins, digital renderings of the lake with kayakers and floating decks, and a bullet list of investor benefits. In the corner of one page, a small line read, "Pending easement approval." That was when I realized William hadn't been bluffing. He was planning to go after my land the same way Karen had, but with corporate polish instead of whole chaos. This time I didn't wait for them to make a move. I went on the offensive. I forwarded the brochure to James, and we filed a cease and desist letter addressed to Lakeside Ventures, citing property rights, recent court rulings, and previous harassment incidents tied to the same access point. We also alerted the Lake Trust Board, just in case someone was trying to sneakily purchase influence from another member. But it turned out I wasn't the only one being courted. Tom showed up with one of the same brochures and said someone had offered him 10 grand for a slice of his shoreline. He declined, but the look in his eyes told me he was rattled. I told him not to worry. I wasn't just guarding my gate now. I was guarding the lake. Word spread fast, and it was the whole, ironically enough, that finally did something useful. Under Janet's leadership, the board issued a formal statement rejecting any partnership or involvement with outside commercial entities. They posted it online, delivered it in printed letters, and even pinned it on the whole bulletin board. I couldn't help but smile. The same space that once held Karen's ridiculous posters now displayed a letter that shut the door on her spiritual successors. Lakeside Ventures didn't reply to the cease and desist directly, but they got the message. The website they had quietly launched for their Lakeside Haven project disappeared overnight. Their local office shuttered within a week. No more glossy folders, no more digital renderings, no more creepy salesmen knocking on doors. It was over before it began, and for the first time in a long time, peace wasn't temporary. It felt earned. I got a new gate installed, taller, stronger, with upgraded sensors and a camera that streamed directly to my phone. I added a carved wooden sign, handmade by a local artist, that read, "Private road, no shortcuts." It wasn't a threat. It was a reminder, a boundary carved not just in metal and wood, but in principle. Life returned to normal in the most beautiful way. Kids rode bikes, neighbors waved instead of whispered, the lake shimmered like it had no idea how many wars had been fought over it. Tom finally fixed the loose panel on his fence. Janet invited me to a community dinner, not as an HOA member, but as a neighbor they were genuinely grateful for. I brought cornbread and didn't have to lock my truck. The lake never looked better. Clear water, peaceful docks, and silence broken only by bird song and the occasional splash of a fish. I sat by the edge one evening, watching the sun dip behind the trees, and it hit me how absurdly far things had gone. All of it over a gate, over a 5-minute shortcut. But maybe that's what it took. Maybe sometimes people had to lose their minds to finally find their boundaries. Karen never came back. Her house was eventually sold to a retired couple who planted flowers and waved at everyone. No drama, no clipboards, just peace. Sometimes I caught myself wondering if she ever watched the lake from somewhere else, bitter about the fact that the one shortcut she couldn't take ended up costing her everything. But I didn't dwell on it. I had too much to enjoy. I kept the old gate's broken lock, the one she tried to cut open, and mounted it on a wooden board in my garage. Above it, I wrote one word in permanent marker: nope. That pretty much summed it all up.